Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're going to be talking about photobiomodulation in terms of vision and eye-related health. My name is Dr. Dalton Brothers. I'm an optometrist who practiced down in Joplin, Missouri, and I'm really excited to be able to talk about this topic with you today. This is something that has completely revolutionized our practice and patient care in terms of talking about this with patients with macular degeneration, patients with dry eye, in some cases being able to be applied in a lot of other areas related to vision. So we're going to touch on that loosely today, and we're going to be getting into digging through some of the cases that we've been observing over the last few months. We've got some exciting ones to show you, some of the ones that some updated progress for the ones who have seen some of this in the past. This is going to be something that we've got a new addition to this form that's going to definitely be something that you're going to be really interested in seeing. So hang in till the end of it today, and looking forward to kind of talking about this with you guys in the comments section below. So what we're going to start with today is we're going to revisit the webinar that we had hosted back in the end of July or the end of June of 2024. June 24th of 2025. And during that time, we ended up having a lot of technical difficulties. We couldn't get the mic going. YouTube's platform was just having some major fits that evening. So I apologize again for the delay in getting this back out to you guys. But we're going to make this effort to go ahead and get through this today and get something posted so you guys have access to this from what we had talked about a few weeks ago. So what we're going to be looking at, this is the main document here that really inspired a lot of the research of what we've been doing here in the clinic. And this was a document. This was definitely not my document. I do not have the energy to be able to compile or the patience to compile something of this breadth, but this is something that I came across this in the end of 2024. And what this is that it outlined a lot of the low-level light therapy, photobiomodulation, photodynamic therapy, low-intensity light therapy. There's a lot of different names for this research, I guess. But whenever they looked at it, they had compiled multiple different specialties who are researching areas where red light therapy, photobiomodulation could be beneficial. And one of the things that I really found interesting is that whenever we scrolled down, we got to a point where there was an entire section related to vision, and this was coming up soon. Yeah, here it's right here. But whenever I had looked at it, I came across, and there were quite a few recent publications, but there were a lot of retina publications that were especially macular degeneration. And so whenever we started doing this document basically compiled a lot of the current research that's out there, as many as this individual is able to compile. It's quite an art up here, but we've got about 200 to 250, I believe, cases of research in industries here that are looking into how this is impacting vision across the board. So this was the main document that I came to. We'll put the link of everything down in the description below. But we're going to be showing you today, we're going to be kind of going through our own take of what we've been seeing here today. So this clinic is one that we run. It's a family practice. It's something that I joined. I'm actually the fourth brothers that has worked at this office. It was something that was started by my grandfather, and then after my grandfather became my dad, my uncle, and then when my practice retired, or my uncle's practice retired back at the end of 2020, I took that in whenever I joined a little bit prior to this. So it's interesting to be able to treat some of the same patients that have been treated with macular degeneration for the last 70 years in the same family, and just to see even in such a short period of time how everything is just dramatically changing in the way that we're talking with this about patients. So what we're looking at today, we're going to be talking about photobiomodulation in vision and eye health here. So for those of you that don't know or haven't heard about this previously, this is something that's got a lot of different names. It is known by a lot of different monikers, and in the commercial space, a lot of it is referred to as red light therapy. So this is something that you may have heard about it loosely through other podcasts or other kind of avenues and research avenues, any kind of recent publications, clinical trials. But ultimately, we're using these light level therapies to stimulate cellular function, improve cellular function, basically remove any cellular debris, remove antioxidant, basically act as an antioxidant to clear out some of the waste and the buildup in a lot of these cells. And one of the ones that are particularly sensitive to this type of therapy is within the retina itself. So whenever we're looking at non-invasive treatment ranges here for a range of ocular conditions, this ends up seeming like a snake oil panacea in some cases where it seems almost too good to be true. So this is something, a little bit of skepticism here, and we're looking to kind of dispel a little bit of that today and show you just in some clinical cases of really what this can look like here. So the underlying premise is basically just to boost this mitochondrial activity here of these retinal cells specifically. But there are multiple different areas where we have shown enhanced cell survival, modulating inflammation, and without causing thermal damage. That's kind of the big key of what we're trying to do here. So in that list that I showed you just a little while ago, these were some of the disorders that are actually being researched actively or have had clinical research as case studies published with potential positive outcomes with photobiomodulation at the forefront here. So the ones that within our own clinic we have seen beneficial areas in at least probably 8 of these 12 here within the last 7 months, and this is something that we started offering patients the option to be able to undergo this service for in the same way that we were allowing our dry eye patients to undergo this service. And this is something that we just offer this. We're not promising any kind of treatment options. This isn't something that we're guaranteeing any results. It's just an option of being able to try this if they're interested, and we're trying to basically help them find that safe line to be able to do this with. But overall, a lot of people will say, well, why haven't I heard about this? If this is something that has been so beneficial, why is this the first time or the first interaction that we're hearing about this? And this is a very common question that comes up, because this technology is something that's actually been out since the early 60s is whenever this was actually released. This came out during what was originally released as the Ruby laser. And the funny story about the Ruby laser is that this was made by an individual, and whenever he went to submit his paper about this groundbreaking physical area of what he had just completely about to revolutionize this entire avenue, there was another laser that had come out, quote unquote, that was using microwaves. And whenever they had so many submissions to this journal article that the paper actually shut down any other future and further research that was related to lasers at that point. And so what they decided to do is they actually went around that, and they actually ended up releasing it directly to the public. And we ended up with a lot of different avenues about death rays, about the end of time, and people using this as laser death weapons. And it's kind of interesting to see how that has ended up become militarized, I guess. But ultimately, this is kind of where it all began. And in that point in time, this was something that a few individuals really started to latch onto this of are there any improvements here? Because shortly after the Ruby laser came out, a different type of laser called a helium neon laser was released, and that was the one that was then tested in animal models on a bunch of different areas. It was actually related in this case to skin growth, and non-healing foot ulcers were, I think, the first original ones that were showing. And they had actually even seen prior to this back in 1903 when a Danish individual won a Nobel Peace Prize for this, but he actually felt guilty accepting the reward because he didn't understand the basic mechanism behind it. And even still, that's something that a lot of researchers are still really trying to kind of figure out even now. How is this, what's the fullness of how this mechanism is actually taking place? But Andre Mester began working with some of these shaved mice models and was showing that there was a significant amount of hair regrowth that was happening here. In the same way, whenever he was treating with non-healing skin ulcers, was showing again that the activation of red light on these patients was actually still again having a very similar effect in the same way that Danish Nobel Peace Prize individual had done in the basis of his research. So since that point in time, though, since the helium neon laser has come out, there's been quite a few advancements, especially with the use of LED bulbs. This is something that has really been kind of overcame a lot of the hindrances and the safety concerns was whenever that happened. And as soon as that took place, we automatically saw a dramatic increase in the number of articles that were coming out related to photobiomodulation, related to low-level light therapy, red light therapy. So This is something that even as of today, whenever we actually filmed this was something that there were 8,272 of those entries in that document we just scrolled through. And of 255 of those were actually related to vision, ocular health, and ocular disease. So why haven't we heard about this is saying that, okay, if this has been out since the 70s, how come this is just the first time that we're learning about this? And that is because over the first few decades, they were actually concerned about how much light was possible of being introduced into a retina without damaging it. How they had known about a lot of different situations with welding. They had known about a lot of issues with looking at the sun gazing, a lot of these other practices that had negative impacts on the retina. And so they said, well, obviously we want to shield the eyes from being able to have any kind of irradiation that was present. And so they actually had, for the first few decades, patients undergoing these treatments had goggles on when they were doing this. It wasn't really probably until I would say early 2000s, mid 2003, early 2000, late 1990s, that researchers really started to introduce and say, okay, how much of an impact is this actually having in vision? Is this a possibility of us being able to quantify how much light is too much? And so they really sought out with a couple different models, but all of those models, they found three different phases here. The first one was that if it was not beneficial enough, if there wasn't enough energy, then it did not elicit a biologic response. And this is why even in some of the current studies that you'll see, they're actually sham controlled. And what they mean by that is that they are still sitting under the same treatment window, the same treatment time, same treatment provider, device, everything like that. The only thing that's changed is the intensity of the device itself. And so they reduce it by about 100 times, and then they have those patients in the control group. So they've shown through quite a few times that having a low enough power level is something that's that there's not a benefit or a change that's positive or negative. It just is ineffective. They also found, though, in those mice models especially, is that whenever they were doing this, there was the point in time where they knew about it. And it's not really a surprise. You add enough of anything, there's going to be a point where there's too much of something. And so they found that supra threshold dosage here. What they weren't expecting, though, is this entire range of area in the middle here. And this was saying that somewhere between that ineffective and too much of a dosage, there was a beneficial change that they started noticing in some of these diseased animal models. And so this was something they originally found. They found them in the optic nerves of rabbits. They found them in methanol toxicity, which is something we'll go about here in just a few moments. They found all sorts of ranges with these disease animal models that were showing beneficial changes whenever they introduced red light therapy for a period of time. So one of the interesting studies, especially within the retina, that was really kind of a landmark study in the ways that people started to kind of become really interested in photobiomodulation within the retina itself, was because of a methanol toxicity study. And when they had shown this, they did this basically in the first group here was just basically the normal control that showed the different layers of the retina. In the second unit over here, this was whenever they had actually had their LED controls. So they just only had, they didn't have any methanol toxicity. It was just the addition of the red light therapy there. Down there in box C was the ones that were intoxicated. You can actually see the structural damage, the edema between the inner segments. You've got a lot of areas and problems that are having issues here. But whenever it was something that they actually treated those methanol toxic individuals here with the low-level light therapy, both prior to as well as during and afterwards, they shown that there was actually no histological difference between those rodents and some of the control rodents that were showing. Now, obviously, there was a change in function, but it was something that when they looked at the overall change of those inner segments, the change of those, all of the photoreceptors that were present here, they showed that there was actually a significant change that was happening on these changes here. This was kind of the chart that showed the functional difference, though. So the very bottom graph there was showing actually the sensitivity of these cone-mediated ERG responses. So the very bottom row was the ones that were the methanol intoxicated rodents. The ones that were the ones that were right above that were the methanol toxic rodents that had been treated with LED lights both during and after, I believe it was. And then the one above that was the control group. And then we actually showed above that control group line at the very, very top was control rodents who had actually also had received the LED therapy as well. So this was kind of showing a functional improvement, not just a subversion of damage, but also to see a potential supranatural or a supra threshold improvement beyond what the control groups did whenever it came to function and sensitivity. So this is something that was a really interesting point that a lot of researchers kind of really kind of dug into since that point in time when that came out. So since those recent points, one of the things that they've kind of found and they've concluded on is basically the impact of, at least in some of the pathways, some of the impact that red and near infrared specifically have in terms of retinal health. So whenever you have different wavelengths of light, they found that there is an area within the ATP production of the Krebs cycle of the electron transport chain that was actually something that was activated on cytochrome C. And whenever it was something that was activated, they actually showed a significant improvement in ATP production. They also showed a reduction in anti-inflammatory markers, and they showed a more of a vasodilated effect because of nitric oxide pathway signalings. So there's been a lot of improvements that have been shown, but they showed that this wavelength, that specifically somewhere around the brink of 680 nanometers and 810. 680 is the red, and then the near infrared is closer towards the 810 mark. But they shown that there was actually a bell curve of responsiveness that you could stimulate the ATP production of cytochrome oxidase C whenever you introduced these lights and therapies, at least to enough to cause an improvement without causing too much of a damage. So there's definitely a window and a balance to be had, and I think that's where a lot of researchers are really focused on finding the limits of safety in a lot of these cases here. So this is something that is really interesting to kind of see the changes. Now, not just red light is having an impact in the retina, but specifically we've got areas that are activated from green light. We've got areas that are activated from blue light, near infrared. Obviously we know the impacts and the effects of like low UVA, UVB, UVC ranges, that there can have the negative impacts in vision, but they've found that on the opposite end of the spectrum, there's quite a few positive benefits that are really shown from having this introduced in a clinical sense, and also in a very repeatable sense as far as research goes. So this is a really interesting thing to kind of see this on the cusp of it for where we're at. So the main aspect of mitochondrial health, and I think this is going to be something that a lot of clinicians, a lot of educational systems are going to find a significant correlation between mitochondrial dysfunction and the disease, basically, of which that doctor is treating. And I think that this doesn't just go for ocular health. I think that there's going to be a wide number of specialties, just given the number of the ones who have seen positive benefits from undergoing red light therapy and near infrared therapy, especially. In all across the board, there are quite a few different specialties that are showing a significant improvement. And I think that's why I think being on the cusp of this is such an important time to really document some of these findings and really kind of just raise the awareness of what's actually like a possibility here. Because these last 7 months of undergoing and actually having these discussions with patients, this has radically transformed the way that we are having some of these discussions with patients. And I think this is going to be something that is more the norm instead of the exception, instead of the other way around. So when we looked at the impact here of what that mitochondrial had, is that they showed that it was actually a reduction of tumor necrotic factors here. The TNF basic level A's, alpha levels were reduced, and they had actually fewer activated macrophages that were present whenever they did this, whenever they did these studies back in 2013 here. So when we look at a complement deposition within the retina, this is something that I think that light indicated therapies here are going to be a really big introduction across a wide range of diseases, from early preventative to late stage progression and removal of some of these active changes that are happening here. So specifically, one of the inflammatory cytokines, IL-6 and IL-1 beta, were one of the ones that have been specifically shown to be reduced at whenever the patients were undergone, or where the animal studies had undergone photobiomodulation around 670. So right there at that cusp of that red line in the red light there in the marker. When we were talking about retinal injuries, they've also shown cases, and this is something that NASA's done a few studies on this previously, where they were actually undergoing focal laser therapies directly, grid laser right there in the middle of the macula, and they had actually shown the controls of what that retina looked like, even just within 1 month, 1 month post-op, compared to the patients who had undergone that red light therapy treatment at like 5 minutes and 12 hours and 24 hours post delivery of that dosage. But we found that there are a significant downregulation of inflammatory markers that are happening here. And I think that in a lot of cases here, they've been showing studies, and especially as far as like the methanol toxicity studies were showing as well. They've had crushed nerve models that have shown an absolute improvement of at least 20% compared to the controlled crushed models of the ones who had viable gliosis or viable glial cells after everything was finished. And I think that this is something that you don't hear neuroprotective very often in therapy. You may have an occasional topical IOP drop that does have a correlation to a study that may or may not have optic nerve neuroprotection here at this point. But this is again something, one of the few therapies that has really come up where the question of neuroprotective here is really being explored. And this isn't just in an ophthalmic sense. This is something that they've actually been showing. This is across the board in cognitive decline patients, in Alzheimer's and dementia patients. There's been shown a lot of research that's going into cognition, both pre and post testing, at a wide range of mental health issues as well, that are showing significant changes, not just a momentary one, but actually dramatic and significant changes in terms of the effect that this happens whenever some of these cells are introduced to this type of light. So when we look at the option of being able to reduce inflammation, especially within the retina, and especially within damaged photoreceptor layers, retinal RPE layers, this is something that is really the key and the hallmark of where macular degeneration is resting here. So some of the recent studies that have come out, specifically with the LightSight trials, as well as a few other ones that were previous back in like 2016, this is kind of a unit that we use in our own office. It's not the same one that was published in the studies, but this is something that in our specific unit, these are the wavelengths that are generally being sought for here as a multi-wavelength therapy for macular degeneration across those papers that we showed you earlier. But this is something that in the ability to increase ATP production, being able to reduce oxidative stress, and being able to decrease inflammation. Each of these different wavelengths have they stimulate a different response here within the retina. Yellow specifically is one that they're investigating it for anti-VEGF properties. The ability to also being is one of the ones that's actually aiding the reduction of cellular deposits, because some of the recent studies, whenever they came out, they made a few claims based as a general whole, and this is kind of like a running theme across a lot of them, but most of them had an improvement of visual acuity by at least one line or more and this is the majority of the patients that were in most of the treatment groups across all of these other different studies as a whole has had an improvement of at least one line or more on the visual acuity chart. This is something that is majority of them as a whole also noted a reduction of drusen volume, which there's not too many studies that have a reduced drusen volume that's being listed outside of kind of case reports whenever a drusen would disappear too quickly and it would actually develop into later stages of geographic atrophy. But whenever it's something that we're showing a reduced drusen volume, there are still the presence of those drusen. It's not something like the floor of it completely falls out, but there are showing that is something that is a repeatable marker in a lot of these patients. But the last one is also being in the ATP production of being able to long-term stimulate these retinal cells with near-infrared light. And I think that a lot of these combined are really going to end up being some effective therapies for a wide range of patients here moving forward. So specifically in macular degeneration, there were landmark studies that were done back around 2016, and this is something that kind of hinted at what we were just talking about, that they did. These were, I believe, in some of the initial, this may have been one of the initial light site trials, one of the initial ones back in 2016. They had 2 or 3 of them. I don't know if this, the one by Mary et al. was included at that. Forgive me if it was. But again, whenever this was kind of the landmark that a lot of the recent ones have been based off of. And that was the thing that they actually showed a significant improvement in visual acuity, a measurable reduction in drusen volumes. And then some of the later studies have also shown that there was a lessening of the production of new geographic atrophy lesions, as well as a lower increase in the size of geographic atrophy lesions compared to the control groups that were receiving either a sham control or either no treatment by whatsoever. So they were saying that there's a potential of being able to slow the atrophy progression compared to no treatments at all. But one of the things that they did find out is, and this is something that was a common thread across a lot of them, and this happens a lot within kind of the research side, which is why I think it's really important to be able to have a discussion about how to translate that from a research to bench to bedside, is really taking what we're seeing in these charts and how do we actually figure this out. But a lot of these studies were designed with large breaks in between these treatment groups. And this is specifically with macular degeneration. It's not all of them, but I would say a big chunk of the ones that are the most like kind of highlighted ones out there. These were ones where they would have the patients come in for a concentrated period of time, usually about 2 to 3 treatments a week for a few weeks. And then they would have a period of a couple months where they would have absolutely no treatments or no therapies, and they would just kind of monitor at that 6-month mark. And one of the interesting findings that they found across the board was that patients would improve, generally subjectively and in some cases objectively. They would improve during the times that the treatment was taking place, but then there would be a subjective waning and a fading of some of those improvements over the following few months. And so this is something that when they noticed this was taking place, they're like, okay, at least at some point in time, we do know that in order for us to kind of maintain some of those clinical results, which is what the patient is also looking for, is that some form of maintenance would be necessary. And that's, I think, where a lot of the work that we're doing in our own clinic is really trying to investigate that. Not so much as it initially was just kind of like a proof of concept. Is this something that has any repeatability? Because prior to being introduced to any of this phenomenon, this was something that was brand new to our clinic. We had never really explored this prior to about a year and a half ago is when we really started to kind of dig into the research. But when they kind of had this ongoing thread that there may be a need for ongoing maintenance, that's, I think, where we really kind of started looking at it and saying, is this something that we can actually take what we're looking at here? Is this something that we can translate this in a clinical sense? And what does that look like? Because not everyone that's going to walk in the door is going to be a one-size-fits-all, and I think that's something that we're really looking to try and explore to find out if there's any differences in the sense of prevention versus patients who are actively losing vision. And obviously, the answer is yes. But across that time frame, though, this was something that these were. This was from a published double-masked randomized sham-controlled study back in 2020. This was when this was published, and one of the things that were in this area is that they were showing that they had a reduction of drusen volume as well as just like of a mean drusen mean central thickness reduction right there in the center of the macula from some of the improvements that were happening in this case. And this is something that whenever they talked about PBM series, this was I believe in this case it was a collection of 9 treatments over a period of 3 weeks, and then there would be a period of about 4 or 5 months where there was no treatment whatsoever. So they would repeat that once again around that month 6, and then the ones here in the bottom row here was taken at month 12. So when they're looking at these, kind of the improvements here subjectively, most of the patients that were in this case, again, it was from this other part of the study, that they were something that were also showing a subjective improvement in that vision. So over on the left side of it, we can actually see some of the average thickness. I know this picture is a little bit blurry because it got stretched out, but the average thickness of this showing right there in the center of the fovea at that baseline was 61, and at the end of back here, it was the number of 39 here at this point. And this was just basically in the overall volume, the cubic volume of this overall was also showing a reduction in the total amount of volume that was taking place, generally, especially by the color map here showing that the amount of drusen that were present, as well as then the thickness of the retinal pigment epithelium. So in this case, being able to show that there is a better connection in either the imaging ability to be able to take place more uniformly across that surface, or it's actually showing a significant reduction of that drusen volume, because each of those images have a little bit of bias, especially in the best corrected lines that are going through these images here. But in general, they were showing that there was actually either a better connection with that RPE layer or just a lessening of that reduction of drusen volume overall. And this is even something you can see some of these changes over on this side here, just adjacent to that macula. You can see some of these that have obviously changed and reduced down. Now, this right here is a significant difference, kind of from the before photos, but this was actually showing this was actually published in 2023, and here was showing a large soft drusen as well as drusenoid pigment epithelial detachments in patients with age-related macular degeneration. So everyone that was across the top rows here, these were the baseline photos. The ones that were taken here in that second row, this was actually taken at week 5, and at the very bottom rows, I believe those were taken at 1 year. Forgive me if I'm wrong on this one. I've got all the links on this part of it here that if you guys are ever wanting to look up the paper yourself, this was taking place. But from what I can remember here, I believe that this was something that they did treatments for about 5 weeks, and then they followed them up either at the 6-month mark or the 12-month mark. But regardless of the follow-up type in that long period of time, even if it was something that took 5 years, I think each and every one of these patients in this category here would be absolutely thrilled to see the final result here of what their retina looked like. And this was showing, again, just a significant change and a reduction of a lot of the drusenoid presence in these retinal cases. So when each of these are showing here, these are also ones that were kind of similar to the patients that were showing obviously an improvement in vision. Again, most of the time having at least 5.5 letters on the visual acuity charts here. They were also showing, again, in these cases here, that there was a small increase in the size of geographic atrophy lesions. But I believe in most of these situations here, the improvements, the increase in size of the control groups in that case, I believe that they were actually more significantly increased in overall size, showing more atrophy in the control cases here. So when we kind of take a break from that here, this is actually something where we're going to break into some of the patients that we've been going through here in our own clinic. And again, these are from a few months ago. We've been following a lot of the patients here since, but this was a lot of the times from when we had actually started our journey here of really kind of discovering how to kind of introduce this in a clinical sense. How do we actually bring this conversation into a bedside manner and have this discussion? And these were a lot of patients that were just motivated to be able to want to try the therapy out and wanted to see if it was something that they could have an improvement like what we had mentioned. Again, we don't promise any outcomes in our clinic. We just have a goal of saying if we have one and only goal, and that is looking at your eyes next year and not seeing it any worse than where it's at today, I'd be thrilled if that was the only option that we had possible here. However, some patients who have seen what we will see here in a second, everyone that was in this specific slideshow, the criteria that we had for this was there had to be an objective sign, an improvement that we could see as providers, clinicians, patients, otherwise, being able to see these photos in person. But there also had to be a subjective improvement. So patient also had to be able to listen and say, I am physically seeing an improvement here, either on the acuity chart or something that I can see. I can see improvements as far as colors on the television, easier time reading, less distortions, whatever that may be. But there had to be at least one tick box in each one of those categories for them to even make this part of it here. And what we're going to follow up with here is one of the cases here in the middle. And we'll highlight it here in just a second. But one of the cases here in the middle, we actually had a follow-up yesterday as of the time of recording this video. And I'm really excited to show you the results because they are quite dramatic. So, patient 1. This was a patient that's been coming to our clinic. He came there for about 4 months, but this is something that he was coming in once a week for his treatment here, and you can tell maybe if it's something that you're not used to looking at these photos, but this patient does not have macular degeneration. He has diabetes and uncontrolled diabetes at that. So The interesting thing about this patient here is that we can actually see that there are entire areas where these yellow deposits called exudates have actually they're no longer present here. And if we're looking at kind of the timelines for these photos, this is something that we can see where the before photo is back in the middle of the early December, and we can see where kind of the after photo was taken again a few months ago here. So this is someone that this patient was just coming in once a week, receiving this treatment. It takes about 20 minutes, and it's something that it's painless and it's quite effective here. So this is really interesting for a few reasons. The first one is that whenever we're actually talking about the changes in these exudates, when I had a discussion with the retina specialist that we have in town, one of the things that kind of really stuck out that she mentioned is said that the only time that she has really ever seen improvements of exudates of this type was actually following focal laser therapy right there to the center of the macula. So the fact that we were able to actually replicate in some of these cases some resolution of these exudative deposits in a non-invasive way is not only significant, but it's also pretty dramatic to show kind of the effectiveness of some of the impacts that this therapy can have. The other thing to kind of point out here is that whenever we actually look at it, this was the before photo. I want you to kind of pay attention to the number of hemes, if what you call or hemorrhages that we see, and we can actually see that in the following photo here, we actually have a few more that are in the after photo here. Now, the thing about this patient here is that every week that he would come to see me, it would be something that he was actually stopping. We would kind of joke about it because every time he would come, one of the main discussions that would come up would be the love for bundt cakes. And so each week he would come, he would have a bundt cake, either small one or large one to himself or with his wife. But it was something that the diabetes basically at the end of these treatment cycles was arguably worse than where it was when it started. And there are changes, especially if we look down here in the bottom size of this, the bottom half of this retina, we can see that there are actually an increase in the amount of exudates that are present down here in the bottom. However, in the sense that his underlying condition is arguably worse than where it started, we were still seeing resolution in entire clock hours of these exudates in a safe, a non-invasive manner here. Now, this patient in particular, this is actually one that is near and dear to my heart. This is actually my own mother, and this is someone that had permission to be able to talk about this case with you here because this is going to be the follow-up case, spoiler alert, for what we're going to be talking about here in just a few moments. So I'm going to kind of show you here initially some of the early changes that we noticed, and then again, we're going to show you here again the follow-ups after this video is done. This is going to be the one that we're following up with next, where you can actually see some really dramatic changes. Not that these aren't dramatic. These are actually quite miraculous, the fact that this is happening, but still, nonetheless. So this was over the treatment of about 3 months here, and this was something that came in roughly once or twice a week for a few weeks and was on and off. But we can actually see some of this part here, this yellow deposit that we can see, this was actually drusen. Now, the other part, the other interesting thing is this other drusen directly adjacent to it was also collapsing here on this the follow-up back here in March. So this is something that's had some really, really, really awesome changes. But the fact of seeing some of these drusens centrally disappear and actually being reduced in a really slow and controlled manner is pretty interesting. Now, this patient in particular, this is actually one. This one is different than what would have been included in the light sight trials. This is a patient that actually has wet macular degeneration. And in this case, this was over a period of about 2 months. And one of the things that I can show you here is that even if we don't understand what's changing here, whenever we're looking at before and after, so this is before and after, even if you don't understand what you're looking at, you can take a look at the entire smoothed area of this nasal retina, and you can even just say to yourself, even if I don't know what's happening, it just looks healthier. The other thing that's happened here is that there has been an improvement not only just in contrast, but we've also had some conversations kind of previously that the injections that she was still receiving, it didn't preclude or remove the need for injections, but the injections that she was still receiving actually ended up having, it felt like what was a more effective longevity in a dose. And there was a conversation at one point in time of whether or not there was a possibility of being able to extend the injection cycle. So it's not saying that there is any kind of claim that is happening here, but it is just kind of, again, interesting points in conversation that has that has kind of come up over the past few months. This over here is the same patient, same time frame. This was her right eye, and in this case, there was an interesting part that took place here. And whenever we zoom in, it'll be something that kind of shows and highlights here a little bit easier. But there were entire areas here, especially right here above, right there above the macula, where there was like more of a smoothing of that pigment. And we've also seen a little bit of the RPE atrophy in the area in the tissue in between those atrophied areas actually reduce. We've also seen, as a side note here, some of the hyper-reflective areas in this before photo have actually again been smoothed out, and the patient is actually seeing an improvement in contrast now after undergoing some of these therapies. This patient. This one here is the last one that's going to be in this slideshow, and then we're going to continue on showing the updated one from my mother. But one of the interesting things about this patient is not so much the amount of change, but the amount of change that happened in just 1 month's time. So this patient was coming in a few times a week for a few weeks. Again, very similar to what we were talking about. And again, there were some objective changes where there was just a smoothing of those retinal changes here, of some of those deposits on this outer aspect of his macula. And again, this was something that in his case, the objective changes, even though in small in that part of it, it's still something over the course of 1 month's time, being able to see, at least in his case, a full line improvement in this eye was definitely a significant change and something that he actually still maintains to this day. This one right here, again, this is going to be the updated form. So the one that had finished previously here was back in March. This is something that's been a few months later. So this is a total of about 18 sessions of undergoing this. And we can actually see that large drusen that was present kind of back here in December is actually fully resolved. And this is actually a large section, probably about the size of this this little heart shape period right here, essentially, where there's been a dramatic change that's taken place. The interesting part about this is that there has been a dramatic change and a dramatic shift in vision. There's been a significant improvement. I do believe as of this last weekend, whenever we checked, it is back down into the 20/20 range, which is on and off has been very difficult to not only achieve but maintain for the last probably the last decade across the board. So the fact of being able to see this in the right eye was not only incredible, but we were super thrilled to be able to see this. But it just kind of is what it is. This over here was her left eye, and this again was something that really interesting cases that's taken place here. This has probably been one of the most dramatic ones that we've seen in clinic so far. I'm just thrilled to have it be my own mother to be able to see the changes that are happening here. But in her case, again, being able to look at those central areas of drusen and actually see in a matter of just a few months of undergoing some of these sessions, having such a dramatic change, not even just all around, but also seeing centrally. So the fact that we're actually seeing a dramatic central improvement in those drusen is just remarkable. She's thrilled with the vision, and it's something that we're really excited to be able to see kind of like what's happening next. But ultimately, this is something that we just want to again, follow up with kind of where we had left off back about a month ago. Kind of make this content out because we were unable to record at that time and had some technical difficulties since then. So apologizing for any of the delay that it took to kind of get this out to you. I'd be more than happy to kind of answer any comments that we kind of have in the comment section below. If it's something that you'd like to reach out to me directly, feel free to do so. Communicate with your email to me. I'd be happy to write back to you if it's something that you had any questions about this. But we're going to be looking forward to posting more content about this, and I think this is just going to be the beginning of really kind of where this content's going to go. But we are really excited about this. This is something that seeing some of the results that we're looking at right now, this is the first time that is really the vision industry has been disrupted in a very long time, but this is certainly going to do it. There is no doubt about it. So we are excited about what the future is looking like, and we are excited to be able to have hope in some of these conversations. There hasn't been a lot of hope in conversations between a provider and a patient in revolving around macular degeneration for a very long time. And this again feels like for the first time, at least in my professional career, I feel like I again have a renewed hope of being able to talk with these patients about this. And again, this is something that we're still early in this process. Even though this process has been out for a very long time, in the eye-related community, this is something that is, again, it's being handled very slowly and very cautiously. But I would imagine that seeing some of the improvements in the protocols that we've written here with the devices that we use, this is something that we are above and beyond thrilled to see some of the changes here. So thank you guys again for being able to be a part of this. This is something that we've been wanting to make this happen for a little while. And, if there's, again, anything else I can do to be able to answer any of those questions, feel free to reach out to me here, and look forward to seeing you guys soon. Thanks.